Hi boys. It's nice to meet you. I am always excited to meet my many descendant grandsons. Let's see. I will try to remember all your names. Alan and Stuart, aka Big Time. And Zach. And of course there is Albert, Nicholas, Sam, and Charlie. Did I get it right? You are all descended from Cora Mott Koenig, or Bobo to you. That is a really funny name for a grandmother. I wonder how that came to be. I am told Kenny Dayman invented it as a toddler. Even though I died from tuberculosis in 1867, modern technology has brought me back to tell you my story. I apologize that I may seem a little severe. I can't smile or laugh yet with this technology, but hopefully, I will soon. My story is a happy and sad one, and since you are my descendant, I hope you will be interested in what I have to tell you. My daughter, Mary Bernardina Sanchez, married Marshall Lockhart Mott in 1883. Bernardina and Marshall were Bobo's grandparents. After they married, they moved to North Carolina where Marshall worked as an attorney. My name is Mary Ann Sanchez and I am really happy to be able to have this opportunity to tell you more about me and my family. Yep, that's an old photograph of me in my favorite dress. Mama made it for me. It was a wonderful dark blue taffeta dress with lace trimmings and a matching shawl. Everybody always told me it was the most beautiful dress they had ever seen. I am the daughter of William, Albert, Jackson and Elizabeth Miller, and I was born on June 9, 1838 and named Mary and Bryson Jackson. My mother and father were first cousins, and they both grew up in St. Mary's, Georgia. Daddy's father and Mama's mother were brother and sister. They married in May of 1836 at Miller's Bluff, just east of St. Mary's at the home of my maternal grandfather, Thomas Harvey Miller. Grandpa Miller's family had migrated to Georgia from North Carolina a number of years earlier and were a large family in the St. Mary's area. Grandpa had fought in the War of 1812 when the British invaded and took St. Mary's. The British took over the fort at Point Peter, and burned his house down that day, while he hid in a pond filled with marsh grass to keep from being captured. This photo is taken from St. Mary's looking across the marsh towards Peter's Point. Where the rightmost little white house is on the shore, is where Grandpa's house on Miller's Bluff was located. He had extensive land holdings there and a very large plantation with over 80 slaves. Believe it or not, the harbor there at St. Mary's was the third largest seaport in the United States in the late 1700s and early 1800s. I can't remember exactly when my parents moved to Augusta, but I, and most of my siblings, were born there. Daddy and his brothers were all very successful businessmen in Augusta. Daddy was one of 9 children. He and his brothers James, George, and John started an auction and commission business which eventually became the firm of Jackson, Miller, and Verderi. The brothers were instrumental in the formation of the Augusta Canal which greatly enhanced factory business in the city. Uncle George owned the Enterprise Factory, the first factory on the canal milling grain and flour and later cloth. Uncle James became the founder of the town of North Augusta and promoted bringing the railroad to Augusta. Uncle John became one of the most prominent Confederate generals in the Civil War. And he practiced law in Augusta after the war was over. And Daddy was the president of the Augusta factory. It was located on the canal and produced cotton and woolen cloth. That mill provided most of the cloth for all the uniforms of Confederate soldiers. Daddy also gave away great amounts of cloth to citizens impoverished by the war. At the end of the war, Daddy became the president of the Augusta National Bank. He held both positions at the factory and bank until his death in 1882. In Augusta, we had a full square block family compound on Green Street when I was growing up. It was a wonderful place to play and there were always people coming and going, social gatherings and parties. We loved to hang over the fence and watch the fancy carriages go by with men and women going to town dressed in their finest. I went to the local schools and Mama taught me all the usual homemaking skills I would need. Needless to say, I grew up in a pretty well-to-do household. About 1856, when I was 18, I first laid eyes on the most handsome man I had ever seen. His name was Bernardino Sanchez. He was tall, muscular, had beautiful wavy hair, and penetrating eyes that were to die for. I knew right away this was the man I wanted to marry. We went through the usual period of flirting, courtship, and visits. I have a whole snuff box full of his cards he left each time he came for a visit. He had come to work for Daddy as a grocery commission merchant in a new venture with Mr. Kingsley. Daddy liked him and he was good at his job. When Bernardino finally asked me to marry him, Daddy and Mama were both overjoyed. The day finally came, and we were married on November 10, 1857, by the Reverend Davis in the Presbyterian Church. Our parties before and after the wedding were so wonderful. And I felt as if I was in heaven. Bernardino was born in Florida. But he lived for much of his youth in St. Mary's, Georgia, the same little town Daddy had come from. Initially, the Sanchez family was from old Spanish East Florida, when Florida was still a part of Spain. The Sanchezes arrived in the early 1600s, and were among the first settlers in St. Augustine. Of the several Sanchez houses in St. Augustine, this is the Sanchez Espinosa house, the home of Bernardino's great-grandparents. It's the oldest Sanchez house in St. Augustine, and was built about 1775. Bernardino's mother, Dorcas, was one of 8 children, and she grew up on a plantation at Cedar Point, Florida, which was owned by her father, William Fitzpatrick. He was originally from the Charleston area, and later Liberty County, Georgia. Grandpa Fitzpatrick fought in the Revolutionary War and was wounded during the Siege of Savannah in October 1779. He carried the musket ball in his abdomen the rest of his life. He married Susan Bosswood in Liberty County, and moved with her and their first child, Mary, to the plantation at Cedar Point in 1775. Grandpa Fitzpatrick received a Spanish land grant for his 450-acre plantation that is recorded in the archives in St. Augustine. This is how overgrown the big cotton field has become that was in front of Grandpa's home. You have to remember he died 10 years before I was born. Now you have to close your eyes and imagine the house on the far side of the field and the slaves hoeing and singing through the day. Well, I am told I should wind up here because the technology machine is running out of space, but there is much more to tell and I will start right at this point in part 2 of my story. I hope you have enjoyed it so far. I'll plan to see you real soon.